Amateur scientists around the globe all have a theory about global warming, its causes and its effects. Some people question whether or not man-made global warming is fact or fiction. Dr. Thomas Stocker is a professor of climate and environmental physics at the University of Bern in Switzerland. He is the co-chair of a Working Group 1 on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, its acronym IPCC. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Thomas Stocker to Vancouver, to Studio 4, to tell us more.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you. First time you heard the word or the term global warming, climate change, how long ago?
That was many years ago. I think I was still a student where we have been exposed to the changes in the atmosphere and the ocean, and that term global warming then was already in the headlines. Mm-hmm. So that was more than 20 years ago.
More than 20 years ago, and much has changed.
A lot has changed. We now see much more clearly how these changing temperatures and changing precipitation patterns evolve. We see much more clearly how the sea level rises. We see much more clearly and can measure how the ice in the high latitudes of the northern hemisphere and around Antarctica decreases and melts.
And who is measuring it? Who's watching? In the Antarctic or in northern Canada, who pays attention?
Thousands of scientists, meteorological offices, and since the mid-70s, we have a whole host of satellites which provide us with a global view of the change that is going on.
And the change is gradual, sometimes dramatic?
The change is gradual. Regionally, however, it can be dramatic. Think, for instance, the break-off of a large ice sheet in Antarctica. That is an event that is observable from space, but also locally. This is a dramatic event, but the change is gradual.
And the key question is, why should we care? And who should care? So first, the why.
We should care because we have now the ability to look ahead. We know the causes that are responsible for these changes. The cause is the emissions of greenhouse gases by human activity, the burning of coal, the burning of fossil fuels like petrol, gas, and so forth, but also to a large extent the change of land use. Cutting down tropical rainforest is also adding carbon dioxide, the most important greenhouse gas after water vapor, to the atmosphere. So these are the causes.
Tropical rainforest, temperate rainforest, does it matter?
It does matter. At the moment, the temperate rainforests are more stable. The awareness here in these latitudes are bigger, that we are changing ecosystems. If we cut down the forest, we are losing valuable land, we're losing valuable biodiversity. And that message needs to go to the tropics as well.
Okay, because as you know,
high level of activity there.
More silviculture here, more awareness here, better logging practices, planting more trees. But in tropical regions, who do you blame for that? The big companies coming in and pillaging the forest?
Without big companies, such an effort would not be possible. So they are as much responsible as the local governments who permit the exploitation of these forests.
Sure. Okay, so why we should care and who should care? All of us.
Everybody should care because in the end everybody will be affected. People around coastlines living in coastal areas will be affected by sea level change. I come from Switzerland. I won't be affected much by sea level change, but I will be affected a lot by melting glaciers in Switzerland. Glaciers are an important touristical asset, an asset for electricity industry. All these things will change.
So if you live on a low-lying island, your entire home could disappear, I would think.
That's a concern.
Worst case scenario.
That's a serious concern. The Pacific Islands, for example, do have already, and they have become active through an association in the climate negotiations.
What about someplace like sub-Saharan Africa?
Sub-Saharan Africa has special challenges because they are clearly at the brink of sustainability with respect to the water resources. Only small changes there can have a huge effect and be a decisive factor in whether or not that area is an area where people can live.
As our oceans warm, much changes. And I'm assuming with climate change, the oceans will warm, or not?
Absolutely. The climate system is a coupled system between the atmosphere, the ocean, the ice sheets, and the land cover, and they will all be exposed to the changes, not only in temperature, but also the changes in precipitation. For the ocean, there is an additional factor which has come to the attention of the climate scientists, and that is the acidification of the ocean. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere means a more acid ocean, which has impacts on the marine life.
The big mammals, on the plankton, coral reefs.
The coral reefs are in the focus for that.
On this committee, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who sits? How was it put together?
Well, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was funded in 1988 by 2 UN organizations. It's a very small undertaking. It's basically thousands of scientists and a few leaders with regional balance that regularly do assessments of what we know about climate change, and that assessment is on behalf of decision makers and policy makers.
Okay, and you're the co-chair of number 1.
I'm the co-chair of Working Group 1, which is concerned with the physical science basis. That's a technical term, but essentially, what do we know about climate change? That's our task, to inform the policymakers in understandable words every 6 to 7 years.
Okay, so leaders of countries, people who head up environmental committees, if you have a Kyoto Accord debate or other debate, you weigh in on that or not?
We do not weigh in directly, but people can consult. What is actually the knowledge? What are the options that we have for the future? What happens if emissions stay high? What happens if we want to reach a climate target? What do we have to do on a global level? These are questions that we are looking into.
So a Prime Minister Stephen Harper or a Barack Obama could call or connect with the United Nations Intergovernmental Committee, UN committee, and get the information to help form policy.
That's correct. Indeed, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is actually composed of all these countries. So the countries send negotiators there, send staff people there. So they are in the process of looking into these reports, but the reports themselves are made by the scientists all over the world.
Okay, and as you know so well, reports are one thing, action is another thing.
These are 2 completely different
different things. So is there a target, a 1.2 degree rise or a 2 degree rise the world should look at, or who determines that?
There are 2 targets actually being discussed, and that discussion has started in the science and policy circles quite some time ago, but only after the Copenhagen conference in December 2009, these climate targets, that is to limit global warming at 2 degrees Celsius worldwide, that climate target has come into a document at that time for the first time. But this is not a legally binding document yet, but at least that sentence is in the document.
Okay, and why that figure? Why 2 degrees Celsius?
That's a very good question. There is, in essence, no scientific basis. We cannot say that if we have warming of 1.9 degrees, everything is fine. If, on the other hand, we have a warming of 2.1 degrees, there will be huge catastrophe. It's much more gradual. Even a climate change of 1.5 degrees will already mean in certain areas of the planet massive changes to which people have to adapt. Whereas 2.5 degrees resources would be lost in these very areas. So it's a gradual change where what we're talking about.
Okay,
here.
now resources, water resources, minerals, what?
There are multiple resources we are concerned about. If you talk about sea level rise, it's the resource of land, living land. If you talk about precipitation, is the resource of water. If you talk about temperature, for example, heat waves in summer, it's the resource of a stable climate in which you can live healthily.
Sure, or grow food on land where, because as you know, food security is a major issue.
It's an absolutely major issue, and food security is at stake if we talk about changes in temperature, changes in precipitation, in particular in these areas which are at the borders of vegetation areas.
Okay, areas like?
For example, the Corn Belt. If you look at the Corn Belt in North America, you have two boundaries essentially, a southern boundary and a northern boundary. Now, if that Corn Belt moves, the southern boundary will lose its ability to produce food. The northern end, which tends to be close to Canada, will actually come into the Corn Belt, but you will not be prepared because you will not have the infrastructure to actually manage the goods.
Okay, so Iowa, the corn state, may no longer be the corn state. We may be growing more corn in Seattle.
That's right. But it means in both cases, massive investments, massive adaptation to the change have to take place.
Interesting. And then you have to ask, what would the state of Iowa, or a state that grows a lot of corn, what would they grow?
That's their local challenge of adaptation. That's correct.
How do you feel about the greening of roofs and greening of cities, new urban design, so we travel less, use less gas? How important is it in the big scheme of things?
Everything that is associated with the consumption of energy, be it in a city, be it our mobility, be it overland, be it long-term transport, that is of crucial importance. If we want to move towards a society that uses about 2,000 watts per capita, that's sort of the measure that one quotes for sustainable development. That means massive changes in our infrastructure, massive changes in the way how we harvest the energy. The energy is there. The sun is providing enough energy, the tides, the winds, and so forth. We just need to be a little bit more clever to harvest those kinds of energy.
And are we doing an okay job in North America and not an okay job in China or India, or?
All these three don't do an okay job. China per capita is still way below America, way below Europe, but the sheer number of population and their increase of energy consumption by moving towards a technological society, a developed society, is enormous, gigantic.
I'm
so
sure.
We need to do massive steps if we want to meet the climate target. And the steps, of course, need to come first from those countries that are developed, that have the technology in place to actually do the step, to walk.
And the countries that will want more because they are becoming richer and more successful will perhaps look at renewable energy, greener energy, become less dependent on fossil fuel, or not?
Not perhaps. They know full well that this is a growing market, and who sees a growing market and does not step into that growing market is foolish.
Okay, when we come back, I want to ask you about nuclear power, nuclear energy, where it fits, or if you even look at that. I'm sure you do. Dr. Thomas Stalker, our guest, he is a scientist, and he sits on the co-chairs the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.